Hey everyone, this is part 2 of my HTPC build log of the Danger Den LAN Tower 450 watt. So in part 1 I looked at all the components that I'm going to be using in the build, and I also had a good look at the case and started constructing the case. So part 2 is going to be about finishing the construction of the case, installing all of the hardware, and having a look at the finished product. It's not quite the finished product though, because there's a couple more little things that I'm going to do to it. Okay, so I've installed the power supply into the case, and you can see the 80mm fan at the bottom there with the ventilation hole cut in the case. So just looking from the back, the screws that I bolted on the power supply with actually come with the case. They're actually countersunk, so they don't stick out at all. Okay, so I've got the fans mounted. So that's what it looks like without the front part of the case, the front grille. So they're bolted in. And I've just got a hard drive sitting there. That's not one of the ones that I'm going to use, but that's where they actually sit. You can see all the holes in the bottom of the case there. There's enough room for three 3.5 inch drives right there. So this case has a decent amount of hard drive capacity. You could chuck in three terabyte drives right there without a problem. And then a nice spot to mount an SSD would be right there on top of the power supply. And I'm sure there's other spots for an SSD too. Okay, so I've put the front part of the case on. So you can see there's now grills in front of the fans. I'm very happy with the double panel design in the front of the case. It really gives an awesome look to the front of the case. So you can see the sides of the fans there, and there's actually a gap between that front panel and the grill, which I'll show you when we have a look at the front of the case. Also, there's a 30mm, probably a 30 to 40mm gap underneath the lower fan, and above the top fan there's a 50 to 60mm gap. Now this is pretty exciting. There's also 10 to 15mm on either side of the fans. This could mean that a 240mm radiator could fit into the front of this case, which gives the possibility of custom water cooling. So you can kind of see the gap that I'm talking about between the grill and the fans. It just gives a really nice look to the front of the case. So there we go. Now it's time for the next step. I'm going to install the motherboard and the CPU and the memory, and I'll be back once I've done that. Alright, so I've installed most of the hardware into the build now. The motherboard is installed, the memory and the CPU is in the motherboard, the CPU cooler is on. So I've installed the USB 3 expansion slot adapter down there. So you can see that at the back. So both slots are filled. Just a look at the back I/O. I've screwed the aerials on for the 300 megabit onboard Wi-Fi. You can see the power button there, which I haven't yet connected. So the HD TV tuner is also installed, as you can see. CPU power and motherboard power, it's all plugged in. Okay, so now I have all the cable management finished off, and I'm ready to install the hard drives. So you can see I have all the cables tucked down here in front of the power supply. The reason I've done that is because the hard drive's installed just there on their sides. So the hard drives are going to be covering all of these cables. Maybe not completely, but they'll certainly be covering most of them. So I think in this case that's probably the best way to cover all of your cables. It's really the only spot to cover them, and I'm pretty sure Danger Den would have had that in mind when they built the case, because they left plenty of space behind the third hard drive mount for the cables. I mean, they could have put another hard drive mount there, but they didn't. So yeah, that was meant for cables in my opinion, which is great. It's perfect. I mean, you can disappear all of the cables in an ITX case, which is just amazing. It's a great case. I've just got these cables hanging out here for the SATA power for the 2 hard drives that I'll be installing. The other thing that I did was remove the USB 3 expansion slot adapter, mainly because it's an extra cable that I don't need. I don't actually need that much USB 3. I'm not going to have multiple USB 3 devices plugged in at one time. There's 2 USB 3 ports on the back panel anyway, which is plenty. So in its place I put a ventilated expansion slot cover, which matches up with the case quite nicely. Alright, so that's it. That's the cable management done. Now it's time to install the hard drives. What I've decided to do for now, this is definitely not permanent, I've got a 1 terabyte Western Digital black SATA 3 drive and a 2 terabyte Western Digital green SATA 3 drive. Alright, I've got the first hard drive in. Now I misjudged it a little bit. I didn't realise it was going to come up so high. And what it means is that the 24-pin motherboard power cable is actually being pushed down towards the back panel a lot more than I expected. It's alright, it just means that I had to do the cable management again, or some of it anyway. Okay, so everything's done for now, but what I still have to do is replace the CPU cooler and also replace the hard drive configuration. None of that has been 100% confirmed yet, but there will certainly be another video covering all of that. So I was right about the hard drives covering up all those cables that I tucked down behind them. It looks so clean, absolutely amazing. I really didn't expect it to look this clean. I didn't expect to be able to hide this many cables in a little ITX case like this. The design of this case is just superb, it's excellent. So happy with the case. The materials are just incredibly high quality. The design, I could talk about it all day. It's just awesome, very happy with it. Make sure you check out Danger Den's website and have a look at the other products that they sell. They've got an awesome range of cases and all kinds of water cooling components, etc. So I'll just give you a look around the hard drives. You can just see those cables tucked down behind them. You can see the gap between them for cooling and airflow. It's a nice big 10 to 15 mil gap. So I left the front slot free, hard drive mount free, so I can easily add a hard drive. So I've improved this cable management up here now, just cleaned it up a bit, got it more out of the way. Push that motherboard power cable closer to the back panel. The fan configuration that I've got here is just temporary, like the way I've wired the fans. So the top fan goes to the motherboard and the bottom fan goes to a 4-pin Molex to 3-pin converter, which you can see the end of just there. The reason I'm saying it's temporary is because when I replace the CPU cooler, I'll clean up the wiring and come up with something neater. Okay, so I've used SATA 3 cables for the hard drives because both the hard drives are SATA 3. The power's hooked up, the SATA 3 cables are hooked up. I've got the SATA 3 cables running behind the fans there, up next to the fans, so they're out of sight. Everything just worked out perfectly. I'm very happy with it. You know, it worked out perfectly thanks to this case just being so well designed. Alright, it's up and running. Unfortunately I have to show it to you on the floor because that's where my peripherals connect up for my temp setups. I've got both the side panels on, it's all closed up and ready to go. All I have to do now is wait for those final components to arrive, the CPU cooling system, which I'm keeping as a surprise, and also the hard drive configuration. So just looking down through the top, I'm definitely going to put more LEDs in it, more red LEDs around the motherboard, because there's really not enough light shining out of it You can only just see the light from the fans in there. So there we go. Part 3 will be installing the final hard drive configuration as well as the final CPU cooler configuration, as well as performance and temperature results. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please subscribe and give me a thumbs up if you want to see more.